So, good morning and good afternoon. This is my talk about complexity matching between brain and society and hypothesis. Well, the outline of my talk is composed of four parts. In the first, we will talk about on the possible origin of consciousness. The second, on the complexity matching. The third, the social mind issue, hypothesis, and then the discussion and conclusion. Well, let's start from the first, which is on the possible origin of consciousness. And the starting point is that in some recent works, Professor Giorgio Vallortigara, which is an Italian neuroscientist, quite famous in Italy indeed, suggests some issue related to the origin of consciousness. He conjectures that consciousness appeared in living organisms because of the need of an individual to discriminate what is me from what is not me, or best, what is related to me and what is related to not me. Vallortigara used the term happening to me and happening out there, but in order to understand this talk, I prefer to say me and not me. Anyway, let's try to see what is his thought with a toy model. Suppose that there is an organism, a primitive worm, and it has no eyes, but it has the sense of touch, and it can move as well. Suppose that suddenly it feels that something is touching it. So there are two possibilities. The first, case one, is that if it is moving, maybe what is touching itself is due to its own movement. For example, the ground beneath that is touching it. So it is due to itself. Or, on the other hand, the second case, if it is not moving, maybe what is touching is not due to itself, is due to something else, something from outside, maybe a predator. So it should behave accordingly, it should flee. So this understanding whether what it is sensing depends on itself, on its movement, or on something else, could be fundamental in order to survive. Discriminating what is me from what is not me can be fundamental in order to survive. This could be why consciousness appeared, or at least according to Vallortigara, the suggestion of Vallortigara. Now, what are the basic neural mechanism behind this dynamics? Well, when something is touching the organism, an afferent signal, let's say a sensory signal, reaches the brain from outside, from the periphery. On the other hand, when the organism has to move, an efferent signal, let's say a motor signal, reaches the body with the order, for example, with the order move. So the signal somehow transport the signal from the brain. But indeed, when the efferent signal begins, a copy of the signal, named the efferent copy, but it's also known as corollary discharge. Indeed, there are other names as well, but we call it the efferent copy, goes back to the brain. And the efferent copy signal is compared with the efferent one in order to evaluate if what is touching depends on my motor signal. If it is active, it depends on myself. And if the motor signal is off, it depends on something else. Let's see an example. Suppose that the worm is moving, so the efferent signal and the efferent copy must be active because there is the order move. But if the worm is now touched, then the efferent signal becomes active, but the comparator see the two signals and delete the afferent signal because it's due to itself, to its movement, so there is no problem. On the other hand, suppose that the worm isn't moving, so the efferent signal and the efferent copy are not active, and if the worm is touched now, then the efferent signal becomes active, and the comparators this time won't delete it, because this means that something else is touching. So warning, can be a predator, and it will behave accordingly. So this mechanism is behind is behind the idea of Valortigara. And it's interesting, this evolutionary perspective. For example, there are motor neurons, they would be related to the efferent signal, and sensory neuron would be related to the afferent signal. Well, the comparator mechanism would be related to the interneurons, appearing later, a step ahead in the evolutionary perspective. So this seems in line with the hypothesis, with the conjecture of Valortigara. So, as reported by Valortigara, this is the basic mechanism and should be considered not only about touch, but also could be the same when we talk about sight, sound, and so on. For example, if we consider our eye, when an image is moving in our retina, please look at the picture on the right, we have to distinguish if it is due to the movement of the eye or the movement of the object outside. If I see that the image of the car is in a point in the retina, and after I see in another point, is my eye that is moving, or is the car that is moving? And this seems to work with the same mechanism, understanding if it depends on me or on the object outside. And there are a lot of, this is just some reference, a lot of experiments starting from 1950, experiment on fly, fishes, frog, and so on, that study this mechanism. And for example, this is an interesting point, in my opinion. Consider a cricket that is singing. It might distinguish its own sound from the other sound in the same way, with a comparator understanding if it is coming from itself or from the other cricket outside. Well, what happens if the comparator of its different copy is broken? A cricket could believe that the sound produced by itself is coming from outside. It could have a kind of hallucination. Well, if we think that Vygotsky suggested that our internal dialogue can be related to an internalization of the external one, of the external dialogue, the same as we do when we're really speaking with others, well, but in fact, the internal dialogue is related with very light larynx movement, which are visible with electromyography. I mean that it seems that sometimes when we talk to ourselves, we are really talking. There are really a movement of our larynx. But so in this way, it has been suggested that schizophrenia could be caused by a problem in the afferent copy, because we cannot recognize our own voice because there is something wrong in the afferent copy. So we guess that it comes from outside, even if it comes from ourselves. So we think that maybe it comes from an alien, a god, or something else, because we don't recognize the sound as coming from us. And it is interesting, this work entitled "Individual with Pronounced Schizotypal Traits Are Particularly Successful in Tickling Themselves." If you think that when someone tickles you, you laugh, but if you tickle yourself, you don't laugh. Well, people that have pronounced schizotypal traits, when they tickle themselves, usually they laugh. They have, so this mechanism could be involved, say Valortigara. So, according to this hypothesis of Valortigara, the efference copy mechanism might be the basic mechanism at the origin of consciousness, and it is basically related on distinguishing me and not me, or best what is related to me and what is related not to me, just in order to avoid predator, just in order to survive. Now, let's consider this and go to the next step. Let's consider the complexity matching now. There is an interesting work recently published on PNAS by West and colleagues describing a complexity matching model. And quoting the text, they say, the authors say, we consider two complex networks, A and B, which interact with one another at criticality, with the brain of the individual modeled as one complex network and the social group as a second complex network. Well, so let's consider this work. There are the network A, which is the individual one model as a complex network, and the social group as a second network, let's call B. So we have network A, and in the work, West and colleagues talk about the neurologic network, the individual one, and the social network is the second one. Just a note, both of them, network A and B, are supposed to work as a separate decision-making model. It's not so important in this talk what are the decision-making models. Just a note, they are consider that they are made up of n individuals, each chose between two conflicting states, which they do under the influence of their nearest neighbors, this is important, according to an imitation parameter key. And for proper key, they can generate criticality. That's all. So these two networks could be called the DMMA and DMMB, but they are networks that could work at criticality. That's all. Now, let's quote. They are separate, and let's look at the matching, at the complexity matching model that are reported in the paper. Quoting the text, the authors say, West and colleagues say, in a cross-correlation experiment, a small percentage, 5% of units, let's say nodes, of network A, randomly chosen, make the choice on the basis of the choices made by the nearest neighbors, and this is normal, and one randomly chosen unit of the network B. So this is the link that they do with the external, with the network B. And at the same time, the network B is influenced by network A through the same interaction process. So this is the a diagram, a sketch of the connections. But we can say that this seems to be the afferent signal, and this seems to be the efferent signal. So if we consider these nodes, well, these are the small percentage, but they are links from inside, from the network, and the link from outside, the other network. In fact, their work is making the networks match. And they are somehow comparing the signal from outside with the signal from inside. That's the point, because in a sense, they can be viewed as the comparator described before. This is interesting because, by the way, note that the nodes sending the efferent signal, they are in blue now, are linked to the nodes of network B, of course, as well as the node of the comparator. Thus, sending the efferent copy, they would work as the efferent copy signal as well. So the efferent copy mechanism seems to be well reproduced, at least in principle. So our hypothesis now is that the so-called efferent copy mechanism described by Valortigara and the complexity matching model described by West and colleagues seems to be similar, seems to be consistent with one another. So can the complexity matching model be described in terms of the ancient efferent copy mechanism, which is considered a supposed origin of consciousness? Let's go to the third point, which is the social mind issue, with an hypothesis. There is an interesting work of Grigolini and other, in which of 2015, in which the complexity matching model is related to the concept of group mind and social cognition. And in this work, shedding light into the altruism self-image game provides insight into the emergence of cognition. But in particular, Grigolini and colleagues reconsider the concept of group mind proposed in 1920 by McDougall and reformulate in this way. This is quoted from the paper of Grigolini. We make the conjecture that the group mind has a conscious group mind and unconscious Jung component, both of which as transmitter to single individuals through the complexity matching process advocated by our group as the optimal condition for the transfer of information from one network at criticality to another network at criticality. So cognition would emerge at the social level, matching the individual one. And in another point of the same text, we can read, it is interesting to notice that the transmission of cognition can be realized through the steady action of only a few individuals, the parents of the baby, on the brain of the baby under the key assumption that the brain of the baby is a network at criticality. So let's think about the efference copy mechanism, which seems to be in line with the group mind conjecture of Grigolini and colleagues. The baby individual network has to distinguish what is coming from itself and what is coming from its parent, from outside, from the social network, in order to achieve the correct transmission of cognition. In general terms, the ability to compare what is me, the individual level, and what is not me, the social level, seems to be somehow consistent with the social cognition concept. You must be able to compare, to match your signals in order to let the group mind to emerge. By the way, in the above-mentioned paper of West and colleagues, you can read that tools of network science are used herein to provide a theoretical explanation for the value of the Dunbar number as the value of network size that optimizes information transport. So the Dunbar number would have an important role in this model. This could be seen as an important clue in line with the hypothesis we are discussing here, linking the brain and the social group. We know that the Dunbar number is a kind of link between brain and the social group. So this seems to be a clue in line with what we are saying. Anyway, let's see everything again. The first paper of West described a model between brain and society and call it the complexity matching model. So this is a model somehow between brain and society. Then the work of Grigolini suggests an interpretation. The complexity matching model is related to the social mind, which could be a point of view on this mechanism. And we are now suggesting that this complexity matching model could be described in terms of the efference copy dynamics. So the complexity matching model might be seen as an instance of the efference copy dynamics, maybe an evolutionary step ahead, so that it offers a new perspective, a new interpretation, and possibly a new research direction. And on the other hand, the efference copy dynamics could be suggested as a possible fundamental element on the social mind idea as described by Grigolini. So a provocative corollary conjecture is this. The efference copy has been suggested as the possible origin of consciousness. Distinguishing between me and not me would be important in order to survive, according to Valortigara. So can we say that the social mind, since linked to the complexity matching, is linked to the origin of consciousness? Should we focus on something called, I don't know, social consciousness as well, whatever it means? Let's go to the discussion and conclusion. What about competition and cooperation? I hope this will be useful for the discussion that we are going to do later. The comparator compares the individual network, me, and the social network, not me, thus make them compete. So there is competition here. But it is in order to move towards matching, hence towards cooperation. So competition is something that is something towards cooperation. This seems, by the way, just a comment, this is a model that goes beyond the limits of social autopoiesis as reported by Luisi, or maybe we should consider the two networks as part of the same unique autopoietic system. And moreover, what should be discussed is that the efferent copy approach, together with the complexity matching model, seem somehow consistent with the perspective of Bateson, Gregory Bateson, Vaslavic, and the Palo Alto School. In fact, according to their systemic approach, a person is like a node of a network. He is strongly influenced by his social network, his father, mother, sister, grandmother, and so on, but in turn, being a node of the same network, he can influence it. From this perspective, the famous concept of double bind proposed by the systemic approach could be seen in a new light, but we have no time now to see this. Maybe it could be more interesting to talk about, for example, the marketing issue. Some behaviors induced by the science of marketing could be viewed from a new perspective offered by this vision. Interesting, in fact, interesting, a marketing campaign does not just send a message as buy this product in terms of I show you this product, it's nice, it's cool, so through an afferent signal, something that coming from outside and come inside your brain. Instead, an effective marketing campaign should convince you need that product. It seems that marketing doesn't work with an afferent signal only, but with the afferent one as well. I try to explain better. Marketing seems to work in a way opposite to schizophrenia. In schizophrenia, a message coming from me is not recognized as mine. In marketing, a message coming from advertising from outside seems to be recognized as mine, and this is the tricky point. Maybe could be the same dynamics as fake news, because according to this perspective, this is of course a conjecture, according to this perspective, we can conjecture these possible dynamics. Fake news comes from your social network, so from as an afferent signal coming from outside. The comparator would assess whether they match your thoughts, say the afferent copy signal from your neurological network. So fake news would match your opinion only if there is a somehow similar information coming from you. For example, a conscious or an unconscious fear may be something that you hate or something that you love, that it is inside you. For example, a fake news related to war could match a particular fear or an unconscious hate or love, something that it's inside you that match what come from outside. So from this perspective, the fake news phenomenon would be seen not just as something coming from outside. So my last open questions are, can the complexity matching model be described in terms of the ancient afferent copy mechanism, which is a supposed origin of consciousness? This is important. Is the complexity matching or afferent copy model, this similar models as suggested here, a possible fundamental element of the social mind issues, as we suggest? Is the complexity matching afferent copy the key point between brain and society, between sociology and psychology? Indeed, it's in line with the Dunbar number. And the last question is that in the Center for Nonlinear Science approach to complexity, crucial events are related to brain, information transfer, social mind, and so on. So, following this discussion, this talk, are they related to the origin of consciousness? Thank you very much.
Wow, is a great talk. You see, I'm impressed. And I believe that there is time for some questions, fast questions. So I can see, by the way, clicking here, I can see I see Harvey. Harvey has a question. Harvey, go ahead with your question.
I can't hear you, Harvey. Can you open your microphone, please? Thank you. I can't hear. It's closed again. You know, Paolo, that Harvey and me discussed a lot of time about these issues. It's always great.
Okay, I'm ready. Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you now. Yeah.
Everybody can hear. Okay. Since we have such a short, limited time, let me go perhaps to the crux of my question. This issue of the origin of consciousness in very small animals that do not have societies with hierarchies and religions and all the rest of it. Do we think of that origin of consciousness as involving thinking? Is thinking what is being proposed here? And if that is true, what do we do with the cogito ergo sum of Descartes, which has a rather different notion of thinking, but even that is not the most crucial issue. The most crucial issue is, can you really distinguish, as a human, the person from the society in general? I'm going to propose as a counter hypothesis, if you like, that it is impossible to do so. That there are no individuals in society, no separate brains. All of these separate brains that we imagine, including our own, are a byproduct of influences from the outside. All the issues of territory, of religion, of ideology, of social class, and so on and so on and so on, create who we are.
Yeah.
And we as individuals are some integration, some concatenation of all of these things, and we do not ourselves understand, we don't have the mechanism to understand what our social components are, but we are themselves social components. And we cannot distinguish, even with the world's most ingenious computer-based comparator, ourselves from the society in general. We are the society we inhabit, and there are parts of our thinking that are more nearly linked to different sources of influence than others. But the individual is simply an integrated element of the elements of society that person experiences. The society as a whole cannot be distinguished in the way of Valotigara, though the overall concept that there is a society and there are individual persons makes perfect logical sense. But it doesn't make empirical sense when we talk about the way people live in broad society.
Yeah, thank you very much, Harvey. It's a very, very, very good comments in my opinion, and I completely agree. In fact, it's a great comment as usual from your side. I completely agree, because I think that the suggestion of Vallortigara is related to the origin of consciousness, so in primitive animal. And that's why I think that the contribution of the complexity matching is important, because it is a step ahead in the direction that you are showing. I think that complexity matching is a kind of fuzzy, a kind of fusion, a kind of mix of the individual and the social level, and they become indistinguishable. So I agree with your comment, absolutely, absolutely. And this is maybe what I would like to say, because this is what I mean by the step ahead of the complexity matching mechanism and the contribution of the complexity matching in this idea. I say again, the idea of Vallortigara is on the origin. Yeah, thank you very much, Harvey.